Thanks for tuning into the Owl's Nest, guys. Today, Jake and I are going to highlight some of our favorite DPS players from Week 3 of the Summer Showdown in the Overwatch League. Welcome back to all of our regular viewers, and hello to anyone new that happens to be joining. If this is your first time visiting the Owl's Nest, make sure that you hit that subscribe button, turn the notifications on, and like the video. So, Jake, the other day we talked about the dominance of the San Francisco Shock over the Philadelphia Fusion, but today I wanted to take a look a little bit at one of the Shock players, but also at a few of the other players. Some of the standout performances that we saw through Week 3 of the Summer Showdown. And I'm going to start with one of my favorite players, favorite teams. I know there's a little soft spot in your heart for them as well. But Dante of the Houston Outlaws, specifically his Tracer play last week was absolutely phenomenal. And I wanted you to maybe help highlight a little bit of what made his Tracer play so unique and what we saw. I mean, he got a lot of multi-pulse bomb kills, doing something that I think that the casual viewer may not have noticed, but the casters at the time had pointed out to us.
Yeah, I think Dante, he's just a player with really great fundamentals on Tracer and great awareness. I think one of the things I always see Dante doing when I watch his POVs is he's always focused on getting a good perspective on the fight. He's making sure that he actually gets a vision on the important players. So if he scouts the enemy Tracer flanking, he's going to be ready to counter peel and fight in his own backline, which generally is really advantageous for your Tracer, which there were a couple fights where starting the fight that way, bullying out the other Tracer, whether he gets the kill or just sends her running, then allows him to go hunt those backliners down with one less threat to worry about in the opposing Tracer. So I think he has a great balance of that defensive and aggressive style, and that's what leads to these big cleanup fights where he's just racking up the kills. Of course, he has the mechanics to do that stuff, but he doesn't force it. He doesn't try to make that happen instantly at the start of the fight. And go for some hero play. He sets his team up really well to succeed, and then sort of the cleanup comes from there. So I think that just shows for any Tracer player out there that those strategic fundamentals have to come first, and then if you have those strong mechanics, that'll be followed by big plays where you're cleaning up. But regardless of your skill level, I think it's definitely smart to play like Dante. Get that vision of the field, make sure you play, clean up those defensive moments where you have a big advantage first, then look for the big aggressive plays. Unless the situation is super desperate. So, I think definitely props to Dante for having that diverse style. He's not a player who I think of as aggressive. He's not a player who I think of as passive. He knows how to go back and forth between those styles and be unpredictable.
Some of the great plays that we saw from him, obviously in combination with hydration on the Orisa, was the Halt into the pulse bomb kills, which, Dante was throwing the pulse bombs onto the floor as opposed to attaching them to someone. And one of the casters had mentioned that they thought that might be purposeful because if you just throw it on the floor as opposed to attaching it to the Baptiste, you don't get that stuck notification that immediately calls out the immortality field. Can you comment on that as a strategy?
Yeah, it definitely is smart, especially because Bap might not realize, where he needs to drone. If he's not halted, he might drone for himself, or just miss the drone altogether because it's much easier to just look straight down, drop the drone at your feet. Very, very consistent way to survive the pulse bomb. That's what people do when they get stuck. But, with that halt in play, you're putting it on the floor. It's actually now like an aiming game for the BAP. He has to react quickly and put the drone in the right spot, not just look straight down, easy mode when you're stuck yourself. So I think what that does is just make the BAP's job a lot more difficult, whereas we've seen a ton of Tracer's pulse bomb just countered out by the drone. I think that sort of little adaptation, especially with Hydration's pull timing, that he's doing it nice and late. So it's pulling people in right as the pulse bomb is detonating. There's no time to think if you're the BAP. You have to be almost ahead of the curve as far as the pulse bomb goes and the halt goes. It definitely makes the enemy's job harder, which is that's classic good Overwatch, right? Don't make the enemy's job easy. Give them any sort of distraction or complication that you can. And it's a nice little innovation on a play that we've seen a lot. We've seen a lot of combos in the similar vein. Something like Meteor Strike on the Sigma's Gravitic Flux or on a Halt. And the same principle applies, right? Just trying to make it more difficult for the enemy Baptiste. Give him a tougher job than just looking down and pressing E.
So another one of the standout players that had really caught my attention, Sparkle, the Paris Eternal, obviously has a deep hero pool, but specifically, I wanted to focus on some of his Genji play from this past week. What can you tell us about what made his Genji so successful? I mean, it's like he was constantly in the thick of it, and, as someone who wishes they were a better Genji than they were, I find myself eating dirt a lot more often, and it just seemed like he was always alive no matter what the other team threw at him, that he was always in there dashing through and picking up kill after kill after kill.
I think one of the things that separates Sparkle and really the other top Genjis of the Overwatch League is that they go beyond the the traditional playstyle of Genji, which is basically farm the blade, use the blade, and just trying to have a fast farm speed and then win fights with the actual ultimate. Sparkle has the fundamentals and the confidence to just make plays without the ultimate, which ultimately I think really is what defines a great Genji, that they're not limited towards the ultimate. Like, you know, to be fair, it is a lot more straightforward to use like a nano blade, let's say, to clean up a fight. But if you're winning fights without committing that ultimate combo, then you're setting yourself up not just to win a point off that combo, but to win the map, to snowball people before they have counter ultimates, before they have the proper responses to nano blade, which is really how you turn what could just be like a strong moment in the match, a strong fight in the match, to actually the game-winning play, is that you're able to conserve your ultimate by winning fights without of it. So I think it's really, Sparkle just has great fundamentals on the Genji. I think we saw that even before the Genji buffs came through, where Sparkle still had a great performance on Genji, still did a lot without the nano blade. Like, that to me is when I see that, I know somebody's going to be a top Genji player, because the discipline to hold the blade and win fights without it is what allows you to beat out those top teams that are going to also be conservative with their ultimates, also waiting for maximum value. The fact that Sparkle doesn't need to commit the blade necessarily, that he can have a great performance without it, it just sets his team up for big ultimate advantages later in the game, especially as regards like these fast dive comps where the blade really is the most important ultimate. Generally, you're farming nano faster than you're farming blade. So if a Genji uses blade, that's a big deal. It's going to slow you down a lot for the coming fights. So I think Sparkle's conservative playstyle with that ultimate gives his team a big advantage in the long run, makes the other team struggle to use their ultimates optimally because they're so worried about the blade that could come out at any moment.
Yeah, I forget who they were going up against, but I believe this was in week 1 or week 2 of the Summer Showdown. But just what you were talking about, he had pulled out the blade, got nano boosted. The opposing enemy, Ana, actually slept him, didn't get to use the blade, and still ended up getting 4 kills off of it. You were actually casting that match, if I remember correctly.
Boston, I think it was Myeonbong or something.
It might have been, yeah,
sure,
yeah. But either way, love to see Sparkle on just about anything that he plays. And going into our final pick for one of the best DPS players that we saw, that was going to be Ons and his performance on Widowmaker. Now, you got to instill a little bit of the virtues of Ons' play in the video that we did just the other day. Oh, excuse me. Talking about their the Shock's dominance over the Philadelphia Fusion. But, you know, what is it that you think makes Ons stand out amongst the other Widowmakers in the league?
I mean, Widowmaker is one of those heroes where, like, of course you can analyze it and think about how Ons has great positioning, which he does. You know, he tends to play very defensively, position himself on the map so that it's hard for the enemy flankers to pressure him. He can set himself up for a pure Widow duel where all he has to do is win that duel. But it's one thing to set yourself up for that, and it's another thing to be as consistent as Ons is in finding the pickoffs. I mean, this guy does not stop. He hits freakish shots that you just like don't think he's gonna hit. He plays these really tight angles that I wouldn't even consider playing on Widowmaker because I know I just won't hit the shots on those tight angles. I know it's just too hard. There's literally no point for me to do that. But Ons plays those angles and finds the kills. And I'm just watching him play and I'm thinking like, okay, there's no way. Like, this angle is so conservative, it's so safe. The shot is so difficult. Like why are you even here? But of course he hits the headshot and gets the kill, and it's just like, man, this is like perfect play. If you have mechanics on that level, you enable this playstyle in Widowmaker that is so safe and smart that you're just enabling your team to not worry about you. And what that does is it lets the Shock get super aggressive as a group of 5, and they just have confidence that Ons is going to make work with that space, and he does every single time. So I mean, I think for Ons and Striker to be playing Widow and Tracer is truly terrifying. Like, these are, like, when I think of best Widowmaker, best Tracer, I'm not a fan of like really decreeing who's the best, because I think it does matter a lot on patch. But man, Ons and Striker, Widow, Tracer, like I cannot think of a better duo with better synergy and team coordination than those two. So if you're looking to learn those heroes, like, watch their POVs, because these guys are really insanely good at what they do.
Right. Dante, Sparkle, and Ons, anytime they happen to be on the stage, they tend to be popping off. That's going to be all the time that we have for today's video. Make sure you check out our other videos. Yesterday we talked about the San Francisco Shock and their dominance over the Philadelphia Fusion. And keep your eyes open for our next video explaining the Baptiste and Brigitte healer meta and why it's so popular. Otherwise, head on over to CheckpointXP.com for a wealth of other content, video and otherwise. And if you haven't already, make sure that you're following Jake. That's Jake OW over on Twitter and YouTube, and Jake_OW on Twitch. Until next time, stay on the payload.